Welcome, GC Frost. Welcome to This is 50 Freedom Through Passions. You are the author of A Punishing Breed. And just a funny story, I know you've sent me the book, but it went to my mother, and now we're going to be fighting over it when I go and visit her next week. But she was like, oh, thank you for the book. It looks amazing. I thought, oh, great. Now I'm not going to get the book. But yeah, so DC, thank you for joining me. I can't wait to interview you. You've got an amazing story. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes to just give you a little bit of a backstory, and then we'll just jump right into the interview.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, Lynette, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I think I've always wanted to write ever since I was a little girl. And in fact, the way I play guitar, and the way I learned to play the guitar was to actually write my songs. And I think once I had the words, I could actually learn the music. So it's probably the opposite of musicians. So I'm not a very good musician, but hopefully, writing has just been really at the center of my life since I was very, very young. And I wrote literary short stories, and then worked as a nonprofit fundraiser for many, many years, and still just kept like going to classes and had mentors, and wrote about 4 literary fiction stories, and then finally just buckled down and thought, what is it that I love? I love mysteries. So why not start one? And I did that, and about 10 years later, with some starts and stops, finished and was lucky enough to publish A Punishing Breed. So I'm very happy to be here. I also really just love the idea of what you talk about, that we don't really stop growing. In fact, we keep expanding our mind and expanding our spirituality and expanding, hopefully, our health as we grow older. Those are all possibilities. So I love the fact that you're doing this kind of podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And actually, so the podcast is really just to find inspiration in everyday women who are out there doing really great stuff, especially in midlife. And that's the one thing I wanted to mention, is that you actually wrote your first novel, this mystery novel, in your 60s. And so for me, it was like, where did you, I think even like as women start to get into midlife, we start to lose a little bit of confidence. We start to question ourselves. We might get a little more passive in our lives, and we may not want to try to, really to do something new. Now, writing for you wasn't really new, but it definitely took courage to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to actually tackle this novel. And that's where I want to go. It's like, when did you have the aha moment? What was that aha moment that you said, okay, that's it. I'm going to actually commit to this novel?
I think it was actually writer's block. And I think a lot of people feel this way, that you have your life that you live, and you earn a living, and you might do that, and that might be somewhat fulfilling, but there's another creative spark that you want to fulfill. And that could be anything. For me, it was writing, but I think for a lot of people, it's, painting or cooking or gardening or doing something. And I think what you said there is very interesting. And I've been thinking a lot about this. I think also there comes a point, particularly for women, where their life shifts, and what you were before is not what you are after. And so for women, a lot of times, I think you walk in a room and you're seen for what you look like. And then suddenly maybe you reach 40, 45, or 50, or maybe later for some women,
Yeah.
but suddenly that's not who you are. You walk in a room and maybe no one's noticing you for what you look like. And then I think you start to think and redefine yourself and think, well, who am I? How did I get here, and what am I serving? And I think those are very important questions. So for me, I really thought, I'm going to commit to writing something that I don't even know if I can finish or that I can do. And I'm going to do, and because I was going to take that journey, I wanted to take it on something that I loved. And I love the genre of mysteries. I just think that they explore human relationships. They explore, what is it that causes a person to actually hurt another person, and what about all those people that are affected by it? So that to me was really interesting. And, I'm a big Nancy Drew, Agatha Christie fan from way, way back.
Well, yeah, me too, me too.
And then during the pandemic, I reread every Agatha Christie. And that's during the pandemic is when I just really buckled down and finished it. with the help of a therapist.
Yeah. Okay, there's so much there I want to talk about, but let's maybe what we should do is just get a little bit into the book a bit. I know that just from our pre-call and doing a bit of research and watching you doing some readings of your book, um, that there are many characters that you introduce in the book. So when you think about that, your book, it has lots of sort of racial tensions, it has jealousy, there's power dynamics. So how did your like your personal experiences bring sort of light into some of these characters, particularly the protagonist, and some of the other characters? Maybe you could just expand a little bit on those.
Yeah, so the main character is a detective, DJ Arias, and he is a Latino man. And I wanted to do a man because I see a lot of men doing women or writing like a women's voice, but I also see a lot of women writers, which isn't a bad thing, but write about women who are very capable and smart, but seem to be completely clueless to their horrible boyfriend, husband, partner, who everyone's saying, I think that person's a maniac. I think he's just like, something's wrong with him. And
Yeah.
it's not until the end, like, oh, I guess everybody was right. So I wanted the male protagonist to have faults, but also to be caught up in what I feel is very interesting when you are removed from your culture. So maybe you're removed by a couple of generations. So this character is Latino and he has a family in Mexico City and he has a family in LA. And so I think the dynamic there is that culture, which is so close, but a lot of times is a little bit foreign to some other people, or even like half of my family. Half of my family was very white, half was very Latino. And I really like that tension and dynamic. And then I've worked my entire career in nonprofit. So I've worked at public television, I've worked at a local television station, public television station, and I've worked at a college. So it's so amazing to me when you go into these worlds and they're sort of hermetically sealed. And I would say a college in particular is hermetically sealed because you have a residential college with the faculty who are tenured, and you have administrators who have a lot of power, and you have the trustees who are the overseers or the oversight, and then you have the students who are dynamic and come in. They're 4 years and they're going to make an impression on the place. So I feel that that is like a feudal village, and that's kind of what I've seen over time. And I really set my story there because I think you can explore a lot of human emotions within those confines.
I love it. And so just for the audience, so you sort of brought this sort of your history in working in the universities and colleges to the book. So you sort of drew on some of the I guess characteristics of some of the people that you worked with. So yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. I love that. And so sort of leading on to that, in the character development, what values did you want to make sure that you included as people were reading the book so that people could sort of, how I think what for me, it's when you're reading anything, fiction or nonfiction, you try to get lost in the book or you find something that's relatable or some sort of connection. So, what were sort of some of the values that you were trying to draw out in some of your characters?
I think this idea for justice or for what is fair in the world, we have a detective who maybe has a lot of personal faults, but is really just his passion is justice. And there's another character who he actually put in jail 10 years ago who was a young Latino man who was a student at the time. And it's about hierarchy. As a student, he came into this world of privilege because his mother worked at the school. And then when he is trying to get into a fraternity, he drinks too much and is involved in a hit and run, a vehicular manslaughter, and he's put away for 10 years. And this detective put him away. And when he gets out, he has to go back, and his mother gets him a job as a gardener. So he has fallen in the world from someone who has all this potential to someone who may never rise above this station because of both his legal issues and because of where he is in life. So I thought that that was a very interesting dynamic. And then when you're in a college situation, you have students who are literally protesting for social justice. And I have to say, I have seen both in colleges and nonprofits, and of course, large corporations, this idea of social justice, but it doesn't seem to penetrate into actually the nerves and the skin of an organization. You often see a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion sort of officers come and go, but the top people tend to be white, a lot of times male, and they hold the power. So what they may want to do doesn't really sink down to what is actually the DNA of the place. You know, in a small college or even a small nonprofit, most of the people who are cleaning up the garbage are Latino. Most of the people who are the grounds people are Latino, especially in Los Angeles. So that was really important to me to explore what an institution's aspirations are versus what actually happens in an institution where we still hold these very, very strict sort of layers uh, I guess, really the true social justice. So I think that's a very interesting dynamic, and I don't really feel that it's everywhere. And I actually was talking to someone the other day in a reading, or I was saying that, and this person came up to me who is a huge, very, very much at the top of a corporation, an entertainment that runs like 25 executives all over the world, and basically said very few, only maybe like 4 out of 25 are women or people of color.
Yeah.
So I think those are things that we have a lot of work to do, and I think the more that we explore it, the more it's out there in the world.
I agree. And I think too, like for people who are listening, your background is Latino. You grew up, you were born and raised in the USA though, correct?
I'm a LA native, and that's another thing. LA is a big part of it. My mom and dad are LA natives, and my son was born in Los Angeles.
Okay, great, great, great. So let's go into the back to the, you're 60 years old and, you just want to keep going. And we talked a little bit about this earlier around, where, in our midlife, we can kind of tend to, sort of try to settle in a little bit. Maybe it's, a husband wants to go to the golf course, or you want to go to, your friends want you to be lunching. I think that's sort of changing now, but stereotypically that's kind of what we did. We got married, we had our kids, we worked our 9 to 5. We didn't really always follow our passions. Our passions sat on the back burner. When you think about the reinvention, and you talked about that, is how did you, when you're thinking about that, and did you face any sort of barriers as a late stage, I'll call it, writer, author, and if and that whole experience of sort of just your mindset getting pushing through that, what would you want other midlife women to know as they're starting to sort of dip their toe into reinventing this mom, this 9 to 5er, and now I'm going to actually go and do something that I'm passionate about?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. You know, my dad, when I was growing up, always wanted me to marry a very wealthy man, or at least
Yeah,
one who could do provide. My mother, on the other hand, was whispering in my other ear, "Get a job. Always support yourself. Always have
yeah,
money so you can leave if you need to." So
yeah.
I had that dynamic in my head, and and when I was about 13 or maybe even younger, I thought, okay, so I get up, I meet this nice guy, and then what? Then I'm like, what?
Exactly. And then I'm like, what? And that is such a great, I love that. And then I'm like, what? Exactly. And I don't think a lot of people think that way. I think they think, I think there's still girls who are in their mid 20s that are looking for the rich guy. We sort of kind of see it on social media anyway.
Yeah, and so I've kind of always had that in me, and I have been married more than once, and I did marry very young, and I feel sorry. Very lovely person that I married, but I was bored out of my head because I was at home. But the last thing I did before I got married, I became a theater major, and that rocked my life, and probably rocked his life, not in a good way. And so I've always had this, I think, sort of burning desire to express myself in some way. And I wouldn't become a theater major in high school because I was too shy and unsure of myself. So this was like my last gasp, I thought.
Yeah.
Um, so I honestly, in finding the creative part of myself, I think I realized I was not meant for getting married and tending house and doing an ordinary life. So I didn't pursue acting when I graduated, and my dad's and mom's voice was in my head. I needed to support myself, so I did. I eventually found myself, doing nonprofit work, and so I think for me, it was really not wanting to settle into that, like, oh, comfortable. I'm not comfortable being comfortable, honestly.
Yeah.
It scares me, and not in a way like, oh, I'm relaxing. I don't find that relaxing. I find life stimulating, and I want it to continue to be stimulating. And I find that if I am living my life, the part where we take care of our children and we have a relationship and we take care of ourselves, that's great. But if I can have that other layer of really delving into what I find to be creative, which is writing, I think it puts you in a different place. And it puts you in a place that's almost spiritual, and it puts you in a place where you discover things about yourself and about other people, even though it's not a conscious thing. It's just there. And when you actually finish it and look at it, and other people start interpreting it, you see, like, oh, yes, that is exactly what I feel. And that's what I was going through. And this is something a lot of people feel together. And I don't think that happens when you're, in your life just living. And all that's very necessary. But to me, I like to be connected to that other higher sort of voice. And I don't think it's only writing. I think it can be anything that calls to you. And so I just encourage people to really like turn into that.
No, that's great. And I think that is, you said a lot there where even just like, just even though you may not be a writer, but just sort of writing and getting it out into sort of some sort of format so that you can take it and sort of reflect on it. I love that. So when you said you get a little bit of writer's block, what did you draw on to push through the blockage?
So during the pandemic, I
Mm.
talked to a therapist because I had a friend who was going through very severe health issues, and it was just she was much younger. She had terrible, horrible cancer, and I really just was trying to figure that out in my head, not figure it out, but how could I respond to it in a way. So I had this great therapist who was very practical and much more like a life coach. And we worked through that because what he taught me is to be available, to tell people you love them, to respond when people need you, not to try, I think a lot of people, and I'm probably guilty of this too, just push away. So we kind of got through that. And then I said, all right, I have this other issue. I'm, I'm writing this book and I'm stuck. And I don't know how to get through it. And we talked about it. And he said, next time you talk to me in 2 weeks, I want you to commit to giving yourself 1 to 2 hours, whatever it is, a day that you write. And I don't care if it's at 3 in the morning. I don't care if it's at 5 in the morning. I don't care if it's 8 at night. You just need to make that commitment to yourself and just sit there and do it. And you know what? He was absolutely right. I started getting up at 5 in the morning. I sat there. And the other great thing is if you've got sort of like the beginning of a story, you can go through and just like, all right, you're catching yourself up. But the showing up for yourself is everything because then you do it because you it's like a muscle. You start to like, I'm here, I'm writing. And that's not to say that everything is great. The other thing I would say to people is don't be so afraid of not being perfect that you don't put anything on the page. I hear a lot of that, and I hear that in my own inner voice. You write, and then you write, and you rewrite, and you go back maybe 2 weeks later, and you rewrite again. And some people do that through outlines. I don't do outlines, but in a way, that first writing is an outline. So I think it's just committing to that and honoring yourself and honoring your story and honoring whatever it is you have to say. Just do it. And you can go back if you want and you can rewrite it, or you can write free form and, just like you were saying, journaling. I think it's just important to start and make it a practice. And once you have that practice, the words will come.
I love it. So you had mentioned to me that your mentor really just kept saying to you, don't worry about the ending. And I think that you were getting a little bit maybe stuck because you kept thinking, well, I don't know what the ending of this book is going to be. And it was so relatable for me because I see a lot of women, I help a lot of women start businesses from idea to first client. And, I try to keep it to the confounds of just from idea to first client because it's the concept is a minimal viable product and it will always change. And sometimes I think this is where we get stuck. So there's the procrastination piece, and then there's this, procrastination and stuckness. And then there's that whole sort of committing to yourself and having this sort of valuing yourself and your self-worth to continue with the process. But the part that I'm interested in sort of getting your thoughts is like, did you kind of want to push back on him a little bit and say like, no, I need to know what the ending is going to be first before I can continue. I mean, maybe even just even getting into the writing, like, and just sort of catching sort of this rhythm of writing. It's sort of like when you have this idea of what the ending is going to be, maybe that keeps you going. So, but you didn't have that. So tell us a little bit about that process, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to do it. The other writers I talk to, a lot of them do outlines, and they say exactly that it propels them forward because they have an idea in mind. Now, the writer I read with the other day said that her outline is never the same as how the story ends. So you
Yeah.
do go in there and um, but for me, yes, exactly. I was spending probably months reading books like, should I outline? Should I not outline? And I finally came to this really great woman who wrote this thing about mysteries that you can break them down into four basic uh, areas, not chapters, but parts of the book. And that made sense to me because of the way it was paced. But I was still like, should I outline? And then I read Stephen King's book on writing. And I love Stephen King and I love this book because he talks about how you're like kind of in a circus and you're flying on a trapeze and you either have a net or you don't. But when you're flying and you're writing, if you're unconfined, your mind will go places and that mind will take you to where you need to go. It's sort of like a dream. A dream progresses and it ends. And I really liked that idea and I thought, I'm just going to do it. And so in that process, I really came to this moment of realizing that every character has a moment in their life where something very momentous happened, just like we do in our lives. And sometimes that is maybe something very sad, like the end of a relationship or someone passing, or something that happens to you where you do something that you think, I didn't think I was capable of that. Now, how do I move forward? And what I realized in that process of just writing is that every character goes through that in this book. And that and I put that Malamud quote in it, there's a life we live before and then a life we live after. I'm bastardizing that, I'm afraid,
No,
but it's,
it's
but
still good.
but it's so true because it's like that idea when you're a little girl. Well, maybe I'll get up and marry the prince, and then after a while, it's like, well, do I really want to marry the prince? Or
Exactly, exactly, right? Exactly.
yeah, and then what? And then you have to sort of reinvent yourself. So I really love that. And somebody pointed that out to me in one of the the reading groups I was talking to, and that was it exactly. And I wouldn't have gotten there, I think, if I had outlined it so closely. But again, it's a personal choice. I just don't do it. But I love that idea of flying. Like, I'm just going to
Mhm.
trust myself and I'm just going to trust that it's going somewhere. And if you get stuck, it's kind of like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You can call someone and say, here
Exactly, exactly.
I am. In that case, the therapist also helped me because I said, I have all these characters. They're, they're kind of like circling. I need to find some way to sort of get in there define them again in that moment, and then circle around who the murderer is. And he goes, well, you like Agatha Christie, why don't you just put them in a big library and have the detective come in and talk to them all like they do in those
Yeah.
books? And I'm like, that's ridiculous, I can't do that. And then I thought, well, I'm at a college, we have endless meetings where people are called into like to conference rooms
Yeah.
endlessly. So I had an all staff, and that's what the library situation was. Instead of it being in a
Okay.
library, it was a detective going into an all staff and making his speech.
Okay. Okay. I love that. So when you were talking, I just thought, that's where you could have easily not finished the book because you didn't have the ending, but you reached out to your community. That's sort of what I'm hearing through the therapist, and you also have a community of you belong to some community writers, right?
Yes, I
Correct?
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
community of writers. So I think that's also very encouraging too. So when I think about women who might be either thinking about writing a book or starting a business, it's really sort of drawing on your community. Don't get stuck. And the one thing I've realized is that if you continue to wait until it's perfect, as you said, don't wait for perfection, it doesn't propel you forward, so you can't figure out that that's not the way you, in your case, that you actually want the character to be, really. In fact, it may have been intentionally at the beginning what you thought, but as you kind of went down the path of writing that character, it probably became this, no, that's actually not what I want that character to do. I want him to do or her to do this now. But it's only because you got to that place in the book, in the writing process, right? So I think that's just in anything in life, we talk about just get on the path, get started so that the right things do show up, and what isn't supposed to be meant for you eventually just doesn't even show up. So I love that part. So is there any part of this whole process that you think that you might bring forward into your next book? Because I do know you have the next book in the works. So I'm curious, what did you learn that you'll take forward, and what did you learn that I'm probably going to leave it behind?
That's a very interesting question. Yes, I'm about three-quarters through my next book. And just like we were talking about, what's impacting me now in my life is going to actually change the direction of the next book. And
Okay.
I thought, I think it's very interesting because I think as we grow older or we mature or we're put in different situations, we're always put into situations where there's a new challenge. And that challenge can either teach us something, it can defeat us temporarily, or there's a lot of ways forward. So I feel that in my life now, I'm putting everything into this book. And I think that's actually what is a very good lesson. And it's what my editor or my publisher has just written something about, that you don't leave anything behind. You use everything in your life and you use everything that you're going through and you distill it and you put it into what you're writing. And that makes it alive, right? Because the challenges that we face are things that we have to crawl over or under or around and move to the next place. And so, what I'm leaving behind is kind of a story that happened. It's still clinging to him, but he's actually, DJ Arias has become, to me, he's progressing a little bit. Not that much, but a little bit.
Yeah.
He adopts a dog named Evidence, and
Yeah.
that
I actually, sorry to interrupt, but I love that when I was like, oh, the dog is evidence. So DJ Frost is your protagonist in the first novel,
is
and
it?
so the book is, or pardon me, the dog was the murder
He was
victim's
the murdered
dog. And not to
victim's
give
dog.
away too
Yeah,
much, but
yeah.
yeah.
He was
Okay,
at his.
okay,
He
so
found him at his house. Yeah, he
okay,
found
so
her
we have
at the
evidence.
house. So I'm
We have
bringing her.
evidence.
We have evidence.
Yeah.
But she's not only a dog. I think he's beginning to learn how to take care of something and to be selfless, because he wasn't selfless in his marriage and he didn't really take care of his marriage. And so he's starting back at square one. But, I do think that that's a very important lesson to learn for people, that you're more, and maybe that's also the other theme through that book, is that when you take care of someone, maybe you find yourself, or you take care of something, you find out more about yourself than maybe you do about whatever you're taking care of. And so evidence is coming. And then in the second book, he's dealing with the dynamics of his family that we kind of just start to explore. And he goes to Mexico City and then comes back to LA. And there's a whole story also about just living in Los Angeles. So I do want to talk about Los Angeles. I think Los Angeles is often misportrayed in definitely television shows and a lot of times books. It's all about shiny, glossy Hollywood and people who are empty. And I don't find that experience at all. I think a lot of people that live in Los Angeles work very hard, obviously, at a lot of industries, but the movie industry is very hard working. And there's so many people that do the unglamorous jobs, the people who are on a set and the production assistants, the people grabbing the props, the people doing all those
Yeah.
things. And I did work for a few years at Variety, which is a trade newspaper. And so we did see a trade paper. I did experience that world to a certain extent on the other side, kind of what you would say, not the glamorous, shiny side, but the working side. And so I think that's a very interesting part of this city. And also, I feel there's a lushness in LA and a beauty. And there are seasons, even though other people don't see them in the same way.
Yeah.
Um, Waking up in the morning and smelling honeysuckle and birds, hearing birds tweet is a lovely, lovely existence that I didn't find other places that I've lived. So I love it.
Yeah, no, that's great. So tell me then, what did you learn through the process about you? Okay, you were talking a little bit about selflessness and sort of learning that that's your characters learning that. And then I wanted to ask, like, so the process of changing your identity, you've now left your job, you're going to go into the full-time realm of writing the second book. What have you learned about yourself?
I wanted to go back. I've learned about myself what you were saying about depending on other people and your community. So I do write in a writing group, and it's three other women, and they are so generous and they are so thoughtful about criticism. And when you're talking to someone about what you're writing and someone says, I don't get it, or you're not going deep enough, you have to listen to that because they're not saying that to ding you. They're saying that because they want to help you and move you forward. And we talked about this a little bit earlier before we
Yeah.
started the podcast, but there was a scene. There's two things. One, I was talking to a writers group, and a man asked me why the woman was so sexual. And I was like, I don't think,
Oh,
I,
okay.
and I said, well, I think sex is part of life, but I don't think it's like, there's some sex in it. But I said the point to me, and the other women agreed with me, is that this character finds her sexuality as she's growing up because she was kind of always put aside by her family, told she wasn't pretty and told she wasn't, a real full human being. And she realizes as she grows up and matures that she is. And part of that's through her sexuality. So I thought that was a very interesting comment from a man. And all the other women were like, yeah, that's right.
So they were agreeing with him.
They were agreeing with me.
Oh, yeah, you. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then, but the reason that was in there is because this woman becomes a very powerful person. And there's a part in the book where where a man overpowers her because what she realizes is that no matter how strong she's become physically, we're still not, we still can fall prey to other people. And that is a devastating moment. And that was the moment that one of my classmates said, you have to go deeper. And those things are hard. And you do pull from your own life and you pull from
Hmm.
things that have happened to you. And so how do you move through those things? And some of the choices she makes are good and some of the choices she makes are not. But I think that those are ways to explore a lot of things in writing and also listening to when your community is saying you're on the right path, but you need to dig deeper, or maybe you need to alter your path a little bit. And I think we live a lot of times as women, particularly when we're younger, listening to the voices of the voices of men seem to be louder. But
Mhm.
I would like to see more women have a voice they trust, and so and to trust your community to help you move forward. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I really loved your idea about community and altering where you're going. That is not a fault. That's a strength, I think. And it's something that I really believe in.
And so to build on that, I think also to be open to the feedback, because I think even in our pre-call you were a little bit like, she gave me this feedback and I was like, oh, she is crazy. Or not, I paraphrased a little bit there, but you weren't necessarily aligned in the same thinking as her, but maybe she was just pushing you to be more vulnerable, which is sort of what I got from what you were saying here. And it's hard to be vulnerable, and and like you said, it brings up things that you may not want to, bring up out of yourself. And so I think one of my questions was going to be, are you in the book? What pieces of you are in the book?
Yeah, I think I am in the book. Strangely enough, I think I am in the book in several places. One, Danny is the gardener, and I think some of the ways that he's dealing with his identity are things I've dealt with. Even though he's a male and I'm a female, I think this idea of, and it's kind of what I've seen in my son, you don't want to necessarily be identified by what you look like. Particularly when I was younger, you know, you're not white. And so you sort of make yourself into something that is um, super polished. I don't look super polished right now, but at times I try to be. And then suddenly you're no one's like asking you so much about where you come from. But I think that now I'm getting off on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. Like we were
Oh,
just
where am
talking
I in the
about
book?
like
Yeah.
where are you in the book? And what I think what you just said there was like often we wear a mask because we don't want to be either recognized or we need to be perceived as something. And that's what I was taking from what you were saying there.
Yeah, and then the other person I think is part of me is the young woman Fern, because at that age I think when you're 21 or you're 20 and you feel like you have that strange sort of combo of being incredibly sure of yourself and incredibly vulnerable. So
Yeah.
I really like remember that period of time. And then the woman that's a campus safety officer, Hetty, the woman that does discover herself and her sexuality and her strength as she grows up, and you kind of see her backstory. Um, I feel that way too. So I think that those are elements that are parts of me. And what I like to do with some of the other characters are people that I sort of adore, but also I see their foibles and I see
Yeah.
their strengths. I like to put them and take them out of what they do for a living or who they are and put them over here. And what would they be like if they were like a
I
detective in the
love that.
LAPD? So I think that's it's kind of living with people that you sort of are very fascinated with and interested in and are interesting, and you just put them in a completely different place, and you know how they would react, right? You know how they would what they would say. So that's really exciting to me.
I love everything you're saying there, because what I'm thinking is often we can get caught in a little bit of the creative process, right? So how do you build these characters? How do you grow them? And I love that you're sort of taking from, a few muses, if you will, from your reality and bringing it into this sort of, fiction book of, but then sort of having some fun with it. But that's all being creative. And often, I mean, I hear more often than not, I'm not creative. So I would never be able to start a business. I wouldn't be able to, like, I wouldn't even know where to start to write a book. But you're giving all these beautiful little hints of how to get started throughout this whole interview. It's been great. So, yeah, and I just think like I loved everything you said about, you know, drawing on your writers group that you were in. So you'll obviously be taking that forward into
Mm-hmm.
this next book. Um, and just being sort of the power of feedback. And even though you may not have liked the feedback, it's sort of like become a feedback junkie because that's how we continue to grow. And I think we grow, I think we should always be growing regardless of our age. And I think you're a real true testament to it.
Oh, thank you. I do agree with you about that. You know, I am not someone who's, you could say to me, you know, Denise, I didn't like the way you did X, Y, and Z, and I'd be, yeah, fine. But I would go back and think about it. And I think
Okay,
that is what you need to do. You need to go
that's
back
right.
and think about that. So I agree.
You
Feedback
don't
is
have
really
to
important.
take, exactly. You don't have to execute on everybody's feedback, but you can just take and make you think about it. And I bet you subconsciously it is sitting there, and it's probably going to be more prevalent in this next book about the vulnerability and going deeper. Like, because I think you'll always be, your subconscious, I think, is now always going to ask that. So, Denise, you or DC, that is your author. DC Frost is your author name. Your real name is Denise, but or your full
Yes.
name is Denise. I'm sorry, I caught myself there. I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. Your story is very good. It's inspirational, and I wish you luck on the second novel. I'm going to have to fight my mom for the. Hopefully, she's such a fast reader. She's probably be read it by the time I get there on Wednesday. But yeah, I look forward to enjoying the book. And to everybody out there, where can they find you?
I'm at denisefrost.net, and I'm on Instagram as DC Frost Writer, and I'm at Facebook at Denise Frost. So come by and say hi. I'm at TikTok too, uh,
Okay,
which
you're
I
everywhere.
reluctantly go on, but I'm doing it, man.
I love that. I'm doing it, man. I'm doing it. I know exactly, right? We have to stay technology enabled for sure. So, well, thank you again, Denise,
Thank you
and I
so
look
much.
forward to potentially interviewing you on your second novel.
I would love that. Thanks, Lynette.